I can get you a little bit engaged with the presentation today. While they are sorting this out, they say women usually start with an apology and men usually start with a joke. And I was thinking of reversing this by an incident that I witnessed with a teacher and a young child in one of the primary schools many years ago in South Africa. And it was in a year one classroom where the teacher was teaching numeracy skills and addition, basic addition, and tried to get the child to understand that it's not just numbers, it's also real objects. So I asked the little child, what is 1 plus 1? And the child said, 2. And he said, very good. What is 1 bunny plus 2 bunnies? And the child said, 3. So the teacher was very patient and said, no, 1 plus 1 is 2. Very good. 1 bunny plus 1 bunny is 3. Couldn't work this out. I said, but I don't understand. You can tell me 1 plus 1 is 2, but 1 bunny plus another bunny makes 3 bunnies. Yes, sir, but I already have a bunny at home. So we don't always know what's going on in children's minds. I decided to call this talk No Child's an Island. And I want to start this presentation by one of my favorite poems by John Donne. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but I want us to just reflect on the words. No man's an island, entire of itself, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. We are not islands. It takes a community to raise a child, and a child, well, not only children, but we strive social connection and we strive to learn with others. Now today I would like to examine a few things, and many of my co-presenters have addressed a lot of the issues in terms of what's worth learning, what is 21st century learning, what skills, what should be in that curriculum. But there are some questions that I feel that haven't been addressed today. Do we take cognizance of the knowledge that neuroscience brings today about how the brain learns and incorporate that in our education? Do we look at the sustainability of our environment and embed that in our education system? Do we really consider or think that a computer can replace a teacher? I know earlier we talked about the robot teacher. Will that ever be possible? Can computers and online connectivity really compensate for inadequate teaching and learning? And those are some of the big questions. I'd like you to do something for me. I'd like you to turn to somebody sitting next to you and think about, and I'm going to ask this question, what is worth learning? And I want you to think back to, and I'm going to skip two because I want to go to that one slide, and then I'll come back to this. There we go. I want you to think back to, in your 12 years of school education, one thing that you learned, that you could learn, think back to, that was really meaningful to you beyond your 12 years that you were in school. I'm just challenging you. Just turn to a partner quickly and think of one thing that you learned at school that you felt that you can still remember today and that's really meaningful to you. I'm going to ask you, turn to your partner, turn to somebody sitting next to you, and just very quickly think of one thing. Is it easy? What comes to mind? The alphabet? So often, and this is something that Dan Perkins asks in his book as well. He's the person who started Project Zero at Harvard University. How worthy, life-worthy is our education curriculum? Does it really prepare us for life? Do we learn things because people before you learned it? Do you use quadratic equations anywhere? Have you ever used a quadratic equation outside of your mathematics classroom? But do you use statistics, probability? Yes. So why are we not looking at that in our curriculum instead of continuing to teach children about concepts that they can look up on Google in 60 seconds? Now, the Malaysian education blueprint, oops, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused with these buttons, you know, women and we're not, our brains, fortunately I'm very happy to know that the Journal of American Neuroscience says that women and men have different brains. So when I am challenged by matters of space and buttons and electronic equipment, I feel vindicated because I know I've got other skills. So I just want to go back to, oh no, yes, there we go. So in Malaysia, our teachers have the right idea. When we ask teachers in the projects that we are working in, and we're currently teaching literally thousands of teachers in Malaysia, and we ask them to sketch out what the vision is that they have for the future, they will say, we want the 4 C's of 21st century learning. They will say that we want to produce responsible future citizens of the future. Our teachers in workshops have the terminology. And also in our Malaysian education blueprint, those ambitions for the future have been identified. The 6 aspirations that students are supposed to reach. And these are fantastic goals. Leaders, to be thinkers, to be the concept of national unity in Malaysia, the concept of an ethical and spiritual human being are very noble and fantastic goals. But as we heard earlier, there are different interpretations of these concepts. And how do we take these concepts and we make them real? How do we really make this happen in the classroom? So we know that teaching in the classroom and the life in a school is so much different than the life that an adult has. And I thought this is a really good slide. Look at the life of an adult. Well, it's okay to listen to music while I'm at work. I don't get into trouble. I'm not required to bring homework home every night. My job, if I look things up on Google, it's okay. I've got the internet as a resource. I use my cell phone for everything, but we don't allow children to take cell phones into schools in Malaysia. Or some schools do. Some principals are quite, you know, they consider how you can use the devices in the classroom, but it's not practice. So the life of an adult, collaborating is not cheating, is so much different from the reality of what goes on in classrooms. Now, I love Ken Robinson. I don't know if you've watched his videos. He's just absolutely a brilliant orator. And he says children suffer from something really terrible. This terrible disease called childhood. And you know, the question is, how do we really make life meaningful? And how do we prepare children in this culture of compliance and examination for the unexpected? Look at the world today, and I'm going to go through these very quickly. I'm a South African. I've lived out of the country for a long time, but we have serious problems, and one of the biggest problems we have is electricity supply. With a fear that if the electricity network collapses, and this is a reality in South Africa, we can be without electricity for 3 months. And in order to try and counteract that, we have something called load shedding. So every single day, for a number of hours, in every single household in South Africa, you are without electricity. And that's why, you know, people make jokes about these things, but one of the jokes on the internet is, what did South Africa use before candles? Electricity. Because there are candles in all the households. How do we prepare children for a life where electricity suddenly just doesn't exist anymore? How do we prepare children for Black Monday that happened just recently, the collapse of the Chinese currency? And I saw yesterday in the news, the ringgit is now 4 ringgit 48 cents for a dollar. So every day we are earning less money. What happens if the world economy just collapses? How do we deal with this? How prepared are our children? Just a few days ago, NASA made this wonderful announcement that there's flowing water on Mars. Now, how is that going to change the future? Another reality that we all know when we walk out of this building is that we wear masks because the haze has become so bad. What are our kids going to do about it? Think of a future where you never see the sun anymore. What inventions, what thinking do our children have to have in order to deal with this? We all saw the impact of the floods on Malaysia. In my own company, we went out to Terengganu, to the east coast, to try and help bring some relief to all those thousands and thousands of people who suddenly had lost their homes. And this is not just a Malaysian phenomenon, it's happening all over. Another reality we see on the television every night is the migrant crisis. The whole of Europe is being reshaped. What are we going to do with displaced people? So many countries at war. The concept of Europe might be different. Lines will be redrawn. How will children cope with this? And then, of course, what about cyberbullying? What about children who become addicted to computers? They spend more than 6 hours in front of computers. They are passive. What about total physical response and movement? What's going to happen to the health of our nation if we spend it sitting in front of computers? And then, of course, how do we teach children values and how to deal with this cyber world? What is the concept of friendship? How many friends do you have on Facebook? Are they real friends? Do people pick up phones and call one another when it's a birthday? Or do you get a message on your page, happy birthday? What is teenagers' reality today? The number of likes I get on my selfies. And ironically, never before have we been so connected and yet so isolated as we are today. That virtual reality of being connected, yet being alone at the same time. So what do we do to teach children about dealing with and not being engaged in cyberbullying, about friendship online, about keeping your information private? Earlier, we heard about the new goals of Sustainable Development Goals signed by the United Nations. And I wonder how many of you know that Malaysia is one of the signatories of Sustainable Educational Goals that were signed by the Ministers of Education in Japan last year. And that document and that agreement was that the Ministry of Education of these nations will embed these goals for sustainable education in the curriculum. I haven't seen that happen yet. But that was a commitment. And of course, very importantly, is to promote competencies like communication, critical thinking, imagining future scenarios, and making decisions collaboratively. Now, why have I chosen all of this? think of what the Dalai Lama has said. It's about caring, it's about connection, and when we feel connected to others, we make the right choices. Now, how do we teach children this connectivity? How do we teach children these values and these competencies? We haven't heard much today about emotional intelligence, about social and emotional learning, about teaching children the emotional intelligence competencies from when they are very small. But as a person who studies the brain and learning, I do know that the limbic system in the brain and the emotional centers in the brain hijacks rational thought. We all know about those emails that we've sent in a moment of anger and couldn't retract. Those things we say to others or that others say to us that we'll always remember. Those moments when we've lost control over ourselves. We didn't know how to navigate, identify and navigate through those relations, through those emotions. And yet, at the end of the day, it's all about relationships and connectivity with others. Whether you do it in a virtual world, whether you do it in a real world. There's a lot of data and a lot of studies that have been produced on the impact that emotional intelligence has on productivity, on success, on success as a human being, on academic success, beyond the university or beyond the school. Yet, is there an emotional curriculum that students are being taught in their schools? Is it embedded in their everyday teaching and learning, or does it only appear in the co-curriculum program? 6 Seconds is an international organization, and they work very closely with educators from Harvard with the aim of educating 1 billion people internationally on emotional intelligence. And I'm very happy to say that we are integrating all of this work in the work that we do in hundreds of Malaysian public schools. Now, I thought this was a good slide to show you, and just to show you the link in Singapore and Malaysia of 1,070 assessments that were made that shows the correlation between productivity success and high emotional intelligence. The good news is that we can develop emotional skills and emotional competencies in children. The EQ can be taught, not like the IQ that a child is born with. When you look at PET scans, that can be done while a person is alive, right? That's the advantage of modern technology. They can see that certain centers in the brain light up just when people think about things like kindness, caring, and connecting with others. When we are engaged in those positive emotional experiences, our brains secrete neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin that helps with things like memory retention. Do we know about one of the most significant discoveries in the brain lately, and that is the discovery of mirror neurons? We are socially wired for empathy and for working with others. We get our values, we get our feeling of value reflected from the feedback that we get in others. We see it in their eyes, right? We see whether somebody sees us as a person who's worthy, a worthy human being. So I'm going to show you just a very, very brief snippet about the brain. Okay, no, I don't know. Can you click on it?
So then, which of these networks is more complex? We could say a synapse in the brain, the connection point between two neurons, is like a hyperlink, the connection point between two web pages. So are there more connections in a child's brain or on the internet? Well, the internet has over 100 trillion links. And an adult's brain has 300 trillion links. But get this, a child's brain has a quadrillion connections, 10 times the number of connections of the entire internet. A child's brain has more connections than the entire internet. Yes, it blew our minds too. How is that even possible? Let's break it down. As we said, a baby is born with 100 billion neurons. But those quadrillion connections, they're not there yet. Those connections form at a very rapid speed during the first 5 years of life, at 700 to 1,000 new synapses per second. Those connections are created through every interaction a child has, and are important because they form the architecture of the brain. So every time you talk to and engage with a child, you are literally growing a brain, connecting the different parts of the brain, which allows for new ideas, insights, and creative thinking. So each moment of eye contact, each new word exchanged, each time you make a child laugh, you are strengthening these connections. And since there are so many different ways to do this, we asked people around the world, send us videos of your favorite ways to engage with the children in your life. During these early years, a child's brain makes as many connections as possible. And then it begins pruning the ones that aren't used and strengthening the ones that are. A dynamic process that continues throughout life. But since a child's brain is activated by everything it encounters, it can also be overwhelmed, which causes stress. When the brain experiences stress, the body's alarm system is activated. If the stress is relieved quickly, the system easily returns to normal. And while learning to deal with stress is an important part of development, severe situations such as ongoing abuse or neglect, where there is no caring adult to relieve the stress, leaves the body's alarm system activated, which can have serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Toxic stress can lead to a body system set permanently on high alert. It causes the synapses we use for learning and self-control to be pruned, while connections for fear and rash behavior get stronger.
Now, I have a question. If a child sits in front of a computer all day long, what happens? Playing really violent video games. Well, they don't play video games, they play online games now, strategy games. Statistics show that the average American child witnesses 150,000 visual images of violence by the time they're 16 years old. So we have to consider what are those situations that we expose our children to. Children who sit in a classroom where they don't learn in the modality that they learn in best. So in other words, they sit and they listen all day long, but they actually learn better by moving or by discussing or by drawing or through movement. And they're forced to sit and listen to a teacher from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That causes stress in their brains. They experience stress when the work is either too difficult or too easy. That's neurological stress. They experience stress when they are put down by their classmates. When they are teenagers, the limbic system in their brain, the emotional centers in their brain is so active they cannot necessarily think rationally. They interpret things differently. So they are experiencing dramatic stress in their brains. And if there is so much stress in the brain, the child cannot learn effectively. So how do we actually unleash those stress if we just think that learning with computers is the answer? There is a very good place for it, but it's not the panacea, it's not the total solution. In trust schools across the country, as well as the Prestasi project, the Gusto project, we are busy transforming schools in Malaysia. And we embed all these principles within the classroom. We look at transforming education completely, holistically, involving parents, involving the academic and non-academic areas, retraining teachers, retraining principals, and have looked at all the research of best practice to identify what are those key important competencies that we have to strengthen within the classroom. And part of this that we examined was the Sutton Education Toolkit. Now they do, this is a very important study that is, looks at all the longitudinal metacognitive studies that are done on pedagogical strategies. And I want you to look at the impact that collaborative learning has. It accelerates the learning of the child by 5 months in a 12-month period. So a child that has access to consistent collaborative and cooperative structures can progress by 5 months. A child who gets immediate and constant and good feedback can make 8 months more progress than the child that doesn't get good feedback in a classroom. A child who gets peer tutoring or somebody who gets social and emotional learning embedded, look at the progress. But I want to ask you, those of you that are Malaysians, who've all maybe experienced being in streamed classes, look at what it does to educational progress. It slows it down. Now, there's a lot of evidence of what the benefits of collaborative learning in classrooms are, and we embed this in all of the teaching and learning within the trust schools. It promotes the acquisition of social skills, of workplace skills, of communication. It enhances academic outcomes. And I just want to show you a few photos. And I'm going to go through this quickly. These are all some of the skills that children learn when they work together socially. And I think it's worth watching the video because I think Prof referred to this. It's only 1 minute long. This is in a pre-K classroom where children are using collaborative strategies. They are doing this independently. The teacher is not there to tell them. Each of the groups have different activities that they are busy with. In this case, one child asks the question, it's numeracy, and the others then get the fly swaps, and they must identify the right answer. Now look at what the skills are that they are learning. That little boy is really a little bit impatient, but he learns that he has to take his chance. He gets his chance to ask the questions. And they are managing their own interaction. This is a preschool classroom. This is what learning could look like in all of our classes. And I will show you a few photographs of what's going on in the trust schools. So all of these show some of the collaborative structures that children are using. And where's the teacher? The teacher engages with individual students. Students take ownership of their own learning. They coach one another. There's communication, there's respect, there's thinking skills, there's differentiated activities going on. It happens in all subjects, from Arabic, Agama. It happens in primary and secondary classrooms. Students are self-assessing, experimenting, inquiring, and it's helping take education from the 1.0 model to the 2.0 model. But we are not there yet. We have to think about how do we get to education 3.0. And we have to consider what is life-worthy learning, what are those curriculums, how do we change the system that is still driven by examination and by marks, and how do we really transform education from within this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mdm Elmarie. So our next speaker, our seventh speaker for today is